Like all the videos in this series, this one includes concepts that are challenging to grasp. I'll explain in a moment. For now, I'm just having fun. What I need now is a severed finger. You are aware that this is not really a severed finger. I just need you to pretend that it's a severed finger for the duration of the video. I like to explain mysteries, not keep them a secret. I have 3 reasons for making this video. First, as a follow-on to my video number 7, Inalienable Rights and the Abortion Issue, the question of whether rights apply to a fertilized human egg in a dish from the moment of conception. Imagine there is a fertilized egg in this dish. And now I've just killed it. Have I committed a murder? No, I've just killed a dozen of them. Am I a mass murderer? This question requires closer examination. The second reason is that research using fertilized human eggs, particularly the use of embryonic stem cells, is constantly under scrutiny in advanced countries, and the laws can sway one way or the other based upon popular sentiment rather than logic. This issue requires closer examination. And a third reason is that even though the artificial womb has not yet been developed to the point where it can be used in place of a mother's body for the entire 9 months, it probably won't be long before it has. It would be prudent to be prepared for the day when ectogenesis becomes possible. Let's start by reviewing the typical growth of a human from the moment of fertilization. An egg and sperm meet, and using appropriate equipment, we can see when fertilization has taken place. Imagine that this is an artificial womb, and this is the support equipment that provides oxygen and nutrients and removes waste. All this performs the same function as the mother's body. If all goes well, the egg will attach itself to the artificial uterine wall, and 9 months later you have one of these. Now, the first thing I observe throughout all of this is that it's already born from the moment of conception. At no time is it a component of someone else. It's not receiving nourishment from another person's body, somewhat like the severed finger. It's actually more like an adult on life support. Someone must use reason to keep the machinery functioning. If the adult is unable to do it alone, he is going to need help. And in the case of the fetus in the artificial womb, clearly it is helpless and will require expert assistance the entire time. Best I could do. Now, even though this growth is a gradual, continual process, there are some milestones that we can identify. An unfertilized egg is called an ovum. A fertilized egg is called a zygote, and it soon begins to divide, 2, 4, 8, 16 cells, and then it is called a morula, and the cells begin to specialize. After about 5 days, it develops into an almost hollow ball filled with fluid known as a blastocyst. The cells in the middle are the embryonic stem cells and become the embryo, while the cells on the outside of the ball form the amniotic sac and the placenta. Over the next few weeks, the brain, spinal cord, and the umbilical cord develop, followed by brain activity and a heartbeat. Blood, circulation, bones, arms, legs, eyes, and other internal organs begin to appear. Note that from this point on, the embryo is dependent upon the umbilical cord for oxygen, nutrients, and waste removal. After about 8 weeks, all the different types of cells are present, and it is called a fetus for the remainder of the pregnancy. Between 14 and 20 weeks, the mother is typically able to sense fetal movements. This has historically been called quickening. At 21 weeks, it is typically capable of breathing air in the outside world. This is called the stage of viability. Between 23 and 25 weeks, the fetus can open and close its eyes, and the nervous system is adequate for the fetus to feel pain. It is difficult to be certain of this, and it is possible that the fetus can feel some forms of pain much earlier. Now we come to the most important question. Is it logical to say that the principle of inalienable rights applies to an egg in a dish from the moment of conception? That is, does a fertilized egg in a dish have the same requirement for the freedom to act as everyone else? And that it would be murder to destroy a fertilized egg at this stage? Note that when I use the word act, I don't necessarily mean driving a car and getting a job. I mean simply resting and growing. That is acting in itself. So, does it require freedom to act, to survive. Not when additional facts are taken into consideration, and this gets really fascinating. First of all, who has the final say on this? Keep in mind that no one has ever been able to prove the existence of a higher authority, such as a god. We are the judges. So, do rights apply? I say no, for the same reason they don't apply to the severed finger. Why is that? Because in order to say that an entity requires freedom to act on judgment, it must have a faculty of judgment, at least in some primitive state. This finger doesn't have it, and neither does the egg. It does no good to say that the egg might one day develop such a faculty. A potential is not the same as an actual. The question is, does it have that faculty right now? Clearly not. Does it require a beating heart and other organs? They are certainly useful, but they could conceivably be supplied by life support equipment. The essential organ is the human brain, the organ that supports the faculty of awareness and judgment, the mind, and it must exist, at least in a recognizable state. I think it is helpful to use the example of a war veteran. He may have lost an arm and a leg in a war, but he is still a human with the right to think and act. Even if all that is left of him is his head or his brain that we are somehow able to keep alive and communicate with, it's him. He's still there, and rights still apply to him. The opposite case is the accident victim whose brain has been destroyed. His consciousness is gone, even though it might be possible to keep his body alive for months or even years. He is not there. So the brain, the piece of equipment where consciousness resides, must be present and operational, at least to some degree. Unlike this. Let's work our way backwards and see what is the earliest point at which we can say that a human has an identifiable operational brain. Certainly, at this stage.
It's actually able to breathe air and survive in the outside world as early as 21 weeks, and this is currently the record for the earliest premature birth. We can definitely recognize a functioning brain at this point. Can we go back further? About 7 weeks after conception, the first neural connections begin to develop in the spinal cord. Brain waves are detectable, and the fetus is able to make its first movement and get feedback, its first sensory experience. Prior to that, the brain and spinal cord are not yet operational.
So let's stay with the 7-week threshold. Now let's suppose I have an embryo developing here in my artificial womb, but I don't know the exact date of conception, nor do I know if it is developing at the usual rate. It could be a little faster or a little slower. I want to advocate laws that prohibit the killing of a human individual, so I need to know how to identify one, and I want to be on the safe side. By about 5 or 6 weeks, the fetus, placenta, and umbilical cord are all discernible. So my position now, and of course this could change as more becomes known, is that by the time those 3 elements become visible, it may be only a few days before the brain is present and functioning. This, I think, is the proper place to draw the line. Let us now apply that threshold to as many areas as we can.
I've made a flowchart of the ones I can foresee. Pause the video if you need to. I'll explain some key areas. Keep in mind that much of what I'm showing here is still futuristic. First, this path on the left shows the typical progression of a woman becoming pregnant, the stages of growth, and a normal birth. This path on the right shows a futuristic progression of an egg in a petri dish, then an artificial womb, then an incubator or other type of life support. These paths going to the right represent when the egg, embryo, or fetus could be removed from the mother's body and raised in a dish or an artificial womb, assuming it one day becomes possible. Likewise, it could conceivably be implanted back into the mother or a surrogate, and this is represented by paths going to the left. Now you notice that at any point something can go wrong and development ends abnormally, such as with a miscarriage, an abortion, a stillbirth, or something called a molar pregnancy, where a placenta grows, but not much else. Somewhat like growing a severed finger. There are medical terms for every type of abnormality. The change in background color here represents the 5 to 6 week point, the point where an embryo, cord, and placenta first become visible.
Very soon after this point, and we can't be certain exactly, is where I think it is reasonable to say, there's a little person there. Prior to this stage, I think we can only say, there is a potential person there.
So I say that if it is killed on this path before it reaches this stage of development, it should not be charged as murder. But if it is intentionally killed after that stage of development, I judge that it should be called murder. Now you notice this spot here. You're probably wondering how it is possible to kill a fetus in the womb and properly judge it as murder. I touched on this in video number 7.
There has been at least one reported case where a woman had a cord prolapse, which occasionally happens, and perhaps she helped it to happen, but then she cut it. The separated fetus was then trapped in the womb, unable to breathe, and died from lack of oxygen. Now, it was during an attempt to terminate the pregnancy, and the intended result was destruction of the fetus either way. But because the cord had been severed, the fetus was an individual, and the question was, did she commit murder? The only alternative I know of is self-defense, that is, if the presence of the fetus somehow represented a threat to the woman's life. This can be the case with eclampsia. This is a condition where the threat to one's life comes from inside. But if she did it for her own convenience, it would be like a woman killing her own toddler because she no longer wished to provide care. That would be murder. I'll leave it at that.
Lastly, let's take a look at the property status of the egg, and this can be a real mental challenge. While the egg, embryo, or fetus is a component of and wholly dependent for survival upon the mother's body, we must say that it is a part of her, just as we must say that the sperm cells, while they survive within the father, are part of him. At the moment of separation, however, they become items of property. In the absence of coercive laws, they can be jointly owned by the parents, or can be given or sold to someone else. I'll examine the issue of proper legislation another time.
If they are flushed down the drain, everyone gives up ownership.
Once an egg is implanted back into the mother, or a surrogate mother, it becomes a part of her, and can no longer be considered a separate item of property.
On the other hand, the egg in the dish remains an item of property until it reaches the stage of growth where it is judged an individual in its own right. This point here is something that may become possible far in the future. The fetus in the artificial womb, an individual to whom rights apply, could perhaps be implanted back into the mother or a surrogate, where it reattaches and becomes wholly dependent for survival on her body. At that point, we would have to say that it is no longer an individual to whom rights apply, but once again a component of the woman's body, just as it originally was, as an egg. If you find these unusual procedures to be distasteful, could you prevent them, at least in your own neighborhood, without creating victimless crimes? I think so, and I think it should be done through the use of CC&Rs, as I described in video number 11. The main point I hope you got from this video is that killing an embryo in an artificial womb should be considered an act of murder only after it has reached this stage of growth.